Hi, my name is Monterastelli, and the video you are about to watch is a recording from the 24 Hours of Tapping, which is an event that is held annually to support the Peaceful Heart Network. If you appreciate or learn anything from this video, the easiest way for you to say thank you is to support the work of the Peaceful Heart Network, who has worked with over 300,000 migrants, immigrants, prisoners, folks in disaster areas by bringing tapping to them. As you watch the video, across the bottom, you will see a link where you can support their amazing work. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. Mirjam is an EFT Master and Trainer, a meditation teacher, a mystic, a writer, and a researcher. She is the founder and CEO of the Open Consciousness Institute, where transformational healing is approached as both an art and a science. She is the Consciousness Program Director and the lead trainer for Clinical EFT at EFT Universe. Please welcome to our digital stage, Mirjam. Good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, Jean. Hello. Hello. I'm well. Thank you.
It is good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
How are you holding up?
I am well caffeinated, and I just got a bagel with some lox on it. So I'm being taken care of by my New York brethren in my neighborhood. So life is good.
Love it.
So as we jump into the conversation, and for folks who have been hanging out on and off for the last 17 hours, knows that this is kind of the place that I like starting these conversations, is why is this idea of tapping for ancestral healing something that is at the front of your heart, the front of your mind, the front of your work at this moment in history? Like what is the thing that draws you to this? And then we can get to nuts and bolts and how we can apply this and use this ourselves. But I just love to know why you did.
Great question, and tell you a story, because I feel like ancestral healing actually found me rather than me finding it.
Yeah.
And it of course happened in the work that we do, so several years ago, I had a client, and she was a pretty well-known public speaker and coach. And somehow she worked with me, or she wanted to work with me on a blockage that came up for her regarding public speaking, interestingly, even though she was incredibly successful, incredibly charismatic, and really well-spoken. Something happened within her where she felt she wanted to up-level whatever she was doing. She didn't feel like she was really expressing herself authentically. And when it came to especially her sharing personally, there was a block, and we worked on it and whatever. And of course we tuned in, and as we do, we tuned into the body. And she said, what she felt in her body was, it felt like something was choking her. She couldn't breathe, as if she was under water. That's what she said. And we tapped and we tapped. And somehow what came to me was just to induce the phrase, what if this didn't start with you? What if this wasn't your own? And again, this was many years ago. And something really unleashed and broke open. And what she saw, all of a sudden, she had a vision. She saw a little child dunked underneath water, like a 4 or 5-year-old girl, a 4 or 5-year-old Japanese girl. And she had that image, and we worked with that image, of course, because it came up for her. So we worked with that vision. And when she came back, and it was incredibly powerful and transformational. When she came back 2 weeks later, she said, you won't believe what happened. So her mother was Japanese. And she said, my mother has never shared this story with me, but I shared about the session I had with you, and the dunking, seeing that little girl, 4 or 5-year-old girl, being dunked underneath the water. And her mother shared with her that in Japan, when she was raised, when she spoke up too loudly or too bluntly as a little girl, as a 4 or 5-year-old kindergartner, what the punishment method that was used was they would dunk these heads of these little girls under water. So this was a story that was never shared with her, that her mother never shared with anyone, but somehow it came up in the subconscious imprint of my client in this detail. So so this made me incredibly curious. And of course, it made me incredibly curious about my own story and about my own reactions and my own imprints, but also those of my clients. And I did some research. And that's what we are as researchers and clinical EFT practitioners. And it just ended up being incredibly rich and powerful as to how much information was in there, how much new science was coming out of kind of like epigenetics, of course, but also generational trauma, imprints of generational trauma, genetics in general. So this is kind of like how this started to unfold for me. And once it started to unfold, there was no way of stopping it. So that's when we kind of like, when I started to really think about, there's intuition involved, but really what interested me was also how can we create a protocol also for our newly trained practitioners that would work whether or not people felt like they had some kind of an intuitive ability or not.
Yeah. And the, very, very early on for most of us when we're being taught to tap, we're looking for initial sensitizing events. And it becomes really, really difficult when the initial sensitizing event didn't happen in our generation, and so and like to be in a circumstance where first we understand that and then to have vocabulary around that. Years ago, I had an opportunity to interview Mark Woland, who wrote the book It Didn't Start With You. And one of the conversations we had was he had actually decoded when someone is talking about an issue, about whether or not it was theirs or a generation before them, simply because of the coded language that's inside of that. But if you don't recognize that, you just have the sense that you're trying to describe something. And like you shared with the story with your client, like this thing showed up, doesn't necessarily openly show up as vividly as that description, but sometimes it does. And it's completely disorienting because none of the details match our life. None of the details match where we're coming from. And so like I think just like because of your curiosity, I've had similar curiosities, like just giving ourselves permission just to have a hook to hang something like that on just immediately becomes an entry point for us to do this, because it's like I'm not banging my head against the wall looking for an initial sensitizing attempt for me to go do the movie technique on or whatever that particular piece is.
It's a really important hook for the subconscious as an opportunity to open that gateway. And Mark talks a lot about that language encoding, and I loved his book, and that was one of the first things I read and was fantastic, and I can highly recommend it. The interesting thing also about our brain is if the root cause, the root memory isn't rooted in our own life, the problem with our archaic brain is that our brain kind of like needs a reference, right? That's why we also, what we do also with clinical EFT, we create a reference for our brain to make a connection to say, okay, our hippocampus has tagged these sensory experiences as threats. And now that we realize it and tap on them, we can untag them, we can deactivate them. But what happens if the experience is not rooted in our own life? How do we untag that? And the problem with our archaic brain is if it doesn't have a reference, it's not going to say, oh, I'm fine, we're just going to let this go. All of a sudden, and especially if the root is a really traumatic event and it's not rooted in our own life, our brain will still tag everything. Our brain will scan everything for survival. And this is somewhat tricky with generational trauma. But again, in that sense, we can create a reference for our brain, whether or not the original event was rooted in our own life or not.
And I think one of the things that's also like really important as we start this conversation, that it can feel really scary that, oh, this fear of water is in my genes. Does that mean it is something that I'm stuck with because it's encoded into my genes? And the fact that like, just because because it was passed to us in that way, for us as tappers, it provides challenges for us to find an entryway into it. But if we do find that, then we can tap on it the way that like we have the ability to clear things like everything else. And so like for folks who have not like as this conversation unfolds, I'm sure you're going to share lots of ways that we can think about and talk about this. But for the uninitiated who are stepping into this, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed going, oh no, there is this thing that I'm carrying that I'm never going to be able to deal with because it wasn't my thing. Like, I just want to set people's concerns aside before we kind of dive into this and look at it in that particular way.
I always say something. I always say there is good and bad news about generational trauma, such as with anything else.
Yeah.
The bad news is it induces a lot of stress that didn't start with you. The good news is it induces a lot of stress because stress shows up in our body, and we can tackle that with tapping. We can actually deactivate that. And in what still counts as modern psychology, even our pre-verbal, pre-conscious trauma was deemed to be so hardwired that it wouldn't be able to, that we wouldn't be able to change it. Like, this is like not that long ago. We're saying like 15, 20 years ago. And some traditional psychologists still believe we can't change these, but we have so much evidence now, and we have so much experience now to see now these imprints can actually be transformed and changed, and pretty rapidly with tapping.
Yeah. And like in my lifetime, neuroplasticity was discovered. Like I can remember as a middle schooler, as they were trying to scare us not to drinking, they were saying, you only have so many brain cells, and if you drink alcohol, you'll kill them and you'll be out of your brain cells because your brain is this static thing. And you know, as we discover these things, I keep hearkening back to Gary Craig saying, we are on the ground floor of the healing high rise. Like, this moment in history is the least that we are ever going to know ever again about this. Like, in this moment, in our advanced state, and we know so much more than, you know, when I started doing this 20 years ago in so many different ways. And this, like, we're just building our way into that particular thing. And so it's like, it is good news that we recognize this. And it's even greater news that we now have proof to show that these sorts of things can be transformed.
Yes, absolutely.
So we now know that, so we know it is possible for us to be carrying stories about how the world is dangerous based on the lived experiences of generations that came before us. Okay. So that is a framework fact that kind of sets the table. Okay.
Right.
What does that have to do with an individual in a moment? And how do we leverage that piece of general information to the specific of my experience? Like how do you, as a practitioner working with someone, or how do you, if you're teaching someone to work on their own, engage with this idea, not in a theoretical or just general knowledge sense, but a practical sense where I can actually start to create change?
Yes. Great question. So again, there's a couple of questions that we can do. We can make a couple of assumptions that open that gateway. And a very simple inquiry that you can do with yourself at any time when and it's especially, so we are looking at especially these icky, sticky issues that feel like, even though we may have even tapped on them, we may have worked on them, we may have gone to therapy about them, but somehow my intrinsic reaction doesn't change. My response to these triggers doesn't change, and I can't quite pinpoint it. And it feels icky, it feels sticky, and you may even feel like, this doesn't feel like me. This doesn't feel like my usual response. Why do I react this way here when I usually am not like that? So this is where it gets interesting. And this is, again, where I'd encourage you to tune into your body and feel into, where do you feel this in your body, right? Our very simple inquiry. And feel into, just intuitively feel into, on a percentage scale, how much of this reaction, this imprint, this feeling, how much of this feels actually like your own? How much of it do you feel actually started with you?
And I think, I think by like this frame that you're using for us to think about it in this way, like, when it doesn't feel like me, I think it's really easy for me to go, I guess I was just having an off day. Or, boy, I guess lunch is just not sitting with me right. Or, I had a weird dream last night and I tossed and turned. And because it doesn't feel like us, it's really easy to dismiss it as this like anomaly, a one-off thing that's impacted by something environmentally in that particular way. And by pausing and just acknowledging and asking the question, instead of just going, oh, that's not me, going, I wonder, is this me or is this not me? All of a sudden I'm not just dismissing it, but I'm looking at it close enough that gives me an opportunity to engage with it. And so even if we don't get even if we don't get a clear answer from a question like that, I can see the value of me just stopping and going, because like I said, all this begins with us noticing. And one of the things that I love is the subconscious mind does a much better job with a point of contrast. You know, if I say, what do you want for dinner? I'm like, I don't know. It's like, do you want Vietnamese for dinner? You're like, no, I want Japanese. And it doesn't matter what the thing I threw out there was. The subconscious mind, the conscious mind processes it and finds something counter to it. By pausing and just asking myself the question, is this me? I've now created a data point for my system to create a counter to. And so it doesn't matter if it's generational or not. It doesn't matter what's going on. By simply pausing and not dismissing it and asking the question, like you said, use the word gateway. You're always using the door. It's a door, it's a window, it's a chimney. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's giving me an entryway into it by asking that question. So I really love that just pausing to ask the question before I even get the answer already puts me on the path forward to getting something useful out of this.
Yeah, exactly. And then people are usually surprised as to what answer comes out.
Yeah.
And even people that feel like, I'm not feeling like intuitive or this may feel even a little woo-woo or whatever. Usually the percentage is pretty low. So by low, I mean like under 50%. Usually even lower. And again, we're talking about these icky, sticky things that people are usually also interested in getting to the root of, because it's like, it feels like this is blocking me, and it feels like it's kind of like coming over me and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Right. So, so that's like one in entryway, and you can do this at any time, right? You can do this at any time with any feeling that's coming up. And the next phrase that we'll use, or the next question we'll ask. So tuning into your lineages, mom or dad, and it doesn't matter whether you were raised by your bio parents or not.
Right.
Does not matter. And again, also going back to Mark Wallen, we usually try to see what is the language that you apply around that issue. What are the phrases that come to mind? And tuning into this language, which lineage comes up stronger, turning to mom or dad side, which comes up stronger in this setting right now. Sometimes it's both, but usually one of them will be stronger in the moment.
And I think, like, for me, like, I want to be right. I want gold stars. I want to get the answer. and when I'm in a circumstance where we're doing something that is intuitive like this, I find it really liberating with like that question you're asking, to go, I know I don't know the answer to this, but if I did, is this more likely mom or is this more likely dad?
Yes.
And by giving myself that prefix, what I'm doing is I'm giving my system an out, because, like, on some level, consciously or unconsciously, my system knows that we're doing something that has magnitude. Like I wouldn't be asking this question if there wasn't something at stake. And so the moment there is something at stake, well, I could get it wrong. And if I get it wrong, it's going to be a waste of time, or I'm going to do something. And so for me, liberating myself from that and going, I don't know the answer to this, but if I did, and then ask myself the question, it's amazing how that springs open. And again, it doesn't matter if we're right, I'm guessing, in this particular place, but it gives us an avenue to keep asking questions and tuning in as we're working our way into that particular piece of it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to ask you to continue like the process and unpacking it, and what comes next is we're like we're starting to like, so I asked the question, great. So then what do we do?
Yes. So, so again, we keep going back into the body, because really our body is the vessel of our subconscious. Our body speaks their subconscious. So we do not want this to be over analytical or over cognitive. We want, and it's also very likely that, again, how this got imprinted, whether through epigenetics, DNA, these epigenetics tags, or behaviorally through the behavior that I mirrored, that I copied, whatever, either of those things, it's gonna be pre-conscious or pre-verbal, right? So making this too analytical is somehow may disrupt the process. But the next question that I may ask is how intuitively, how old may you have been, or may you feel having taken this on? And that's usually when we're already kind of like deep in the emotional material of things. And again, I'm not being super analytical, as in you have to come up with a specific event, because that's not gonna be possible. Right. But what we can ask is, where might you have been? Who may have been around you? Who may have not been around you? What is the space? What is the environment? What is the feeling? What is the body posture of that little one? And this is also where, of course, inner child work comes in. But again, we are going back early, and it's also, of course, when working with a client on this, it's giving a lot of permission. It's a lot of pre-framing. It's a lot of saying, this may be weird. This may seem really awkward, because for a lot of people, in utero experiences may come up. So it's we are really entering a terrain where people may not have entered here before. So it's a lot of permission, and a lot of what ifs, as you said, a lot of what if I assumed, what if I am open to, what if this may have, so it's a lot of layers of cushions and maybes. And this is what we'll start to work with. So we'll really intuitively get in touch with this little one who took on a pattern, mostly it's a fear, right? Mostly it's a deep-rooted fear for us. And even if there's other emotions, but there were usually in previous generations, shockwaves of trauma that we're going through, rippling through these bodies, and usually they get imprinted as fear responses in our bodies, and this is how we'll start working.
And I think one thing I think that's important to note as we're talking about this is, fear is not bad when it's proportionate and it's well informed. It's great that I'm afraid of tigers. Like, maybe it's not great if I don't leave my apartment because I'm afraid of tigers, but it's good that I'm afraid of tigers. And so we can see adaptively, like, it's really like, oh, I can't believe I picked up this thing, I'm broken, or something like that, to recognize, no, this is an adaptive strategy. A member of the species has experienced something that it sees as dangerous. And so the way that it communicates the thing that is dangerous is through what it passes on to its prodigy.
Yes.
And so for us to be recognizing, and for me, and this is just my lived experience, it's easier for me to do work with something when I have either understanding or compassion, or both, to how something like this happened. When I'm looking at my past lived experience, the way I extend compassion to myself is, this is my resource state. This was the situation. This is the knowledge I didn't have at that particular moment. Like, even though I made a choice, but I'm providing that sort of stuff. In a circumstance like this, it's about, oh, I'm in this circumstance because the biology of a generation before me was trying to protect me. And
Yes,
they
always
did it.
protectors.
That's right.
Oh,
And they did it, and it shows up in a way that is disproportionate or misinformed,
yes,
or it's a protection mechanism for a context that I'm not going to be in.
yes,
And that protection mechanism firing off. And so for me, like when I have that understanding, and I'm over analytical in my processing just because of who I am, but for me, that softens the entire thing, because it's not
yes.
a woe is me or I am broken. It's like a, oh, this is a
Mhm.
consequence of that particular thing. And I now have the opportunity to respond to that because I now have an entryway in understanding that piece.
Yes, absolutely. A concept I really like to work with and I teach my practitioners is actually coming from Bert Hellinger, the inventor of family constellations therapy. And that's unconscious loyalty.
Mm,
And that's something that I really like to teach just because it is easy for people to
yeah,
wrap your mind around that in a way. So basically what he said is that basically Bert Hellinger talked about that unconscious loyalty is maybe the cause for a lot of suffering in families,
yeah,
and maybe the cause for a lot of this helpless feeling, this I cannot change it. And it's that and it shows up in various ways, but it also comes from our archaic brain, from our brain that says not if I am not mirroring my tribe's behavior or their fear responses, so to say, I may be abandoned from the tribe.
yeah.
And for the brain of a little child, of a little baby, that means death. That means that it's a life and death question in our brain, even though it's not,
That's
that's
right.
but in that sense, unconscious loyalty is an incredibly helpful concept to think through. And again, it can show up by us taking on our parents' emotional patterns to fit in, to maybe manage or save
Yeah,
someone, to manage someone else's emotional dysregulation, to
yeah,
feel safer, adapting the behavior to co-regulate. And of course, we can talk about codependency here as
yeah.
well. And even teenage rebelling can actually be the opposite, the other side of the same coin of unconscious loyalty, of I'm going to prove you that I'm not like you,
Right. Yeah.
is
It's
still
individuation in that process.
exactly, is still in relation to actually me really wanting to be part of the tribe, to not be abandoned from the tribe. So so that's one of the concepts that's helpful to
Yeah.
wrap your mind around.
Yeah, I mean, in the work I do, I start with safe and then I go to allowed, and allowed is just safety in context of community,
Right.
because you're talking about, child being pushed outside the tribe. Well, 4,000 years ago, as an adult, if I was pushed outside of the tribe, it was a life and death scenario because
Yes.
we were so dependent on that thing. And so it makes sense that I'm having loyalties to these systems because violating the cultural norm of this particular place equals to death. And so it makes sense. There's
Hmm.
a part of me that is going to go into lockstep with these ideas, be them,
Hmm.
I learn them by watching the adults around me act, or I learn them as they were passed to me from the earned experience of the generation that came before
Hmm.
me. And so it can feel, responding to this can unconsciously or subconsciously feel treacherous, because
Yes.
solving this problem means I'm going to have the space and capacity to go against the norms of what has come before me. And
Yes.
so solving this problem actually make things worse because it gets this negative this negative outcome on
Absolutely.
the other side of that thing.
Yes. People are amazed, and whether it's kind of in the group tapping experiences or in the tapping meditations that I lead, or again in the classes or in one-on-one sessions, as to how much this brings up, how much resistance and fear this brings up, because this is a major subconscious
Mhm.
protector. Major subconscious protector. So it's, of course, to be handled with a lot of gentleness and a lot of care. And we approach this extremely slowly.
Mhm.
It's still going to be incredibly powerful and unearthing and uprooting in many ways. So there's a lot of integration work that we're doing afterwards as well. But yes, as you said, that's bringing up a lot of information.
So then, so you're saying, so we have all this information. You're saying that we move at it
Mhm,
gently and slowly. What does
mhm,
that like tangibly and practically look like as we do that particular work? So I have this
mhm,
information. I have a cascade of memories. I have physical sensations that are coming up as I tune into this. I have a sense of it is
mhm.
maternal, it is paternal, it is that sort of stuff. Like in the moment, how do we then approach that?
Yes. So again, this is again where the inner child work comes in,
Mhm.
where we show up as the conscious adults that we are today,
Yeah.
and we show up for these little kids within us, these inner children within us that had to take this on to survive. And so there's a lot of gentle conversations that are happening between these parts.
Mhm.
And especially again from the adult. We're not pushing anything, we're not forcing anything to be pushed
Yeah.
away or pushed aside. We're not even forcing this little one to let go of it right away.
Yeah.
We are being conscious adults, we are being responsible adults and saying, I can't let you hold on to what harms you,
Mhm.
as we would do with our own children, right? Where if we
Right.
see our own children hurting themselves, we can't let them do this,
Right.
right? So there's going to be loving firmness, but there is going to be a lot of gentleness, as in
Mhm.
saying, there's a lot of phrases that we'll use along the lines, but of course there's also an apology for having abandoned that inner child part, for having them let them deal with it on their own.
Yeah.
So, but there's a lot of validation, as in all these feelings make sense. I'm sorry you carried this so long by yourself. I'm sorry you carried such a heavy weight all by yourself. And I know how scary this was. I know how much fear there is. And I know that you don't want to let this go. And I know that you are scared that if you let this go, something will happen to X, Y. So we'll also have to also work, of course, with the fear of the consequences.
Yep.
What is the consequence if I let this go? Who is being impacted? Who am I abandoning or feeling that I'm abandoning? Who am I maybe harming? Who's gonna have negative effects if I let this go? So there's a lot of these layers and questions, and working with this, a lot of these gentle conversations as we tap, a lot of working with the resistance to letting it go, almost like we're also sometimes implementing Pat Carrington's forbidding method, as in kind of like, I
Mhm.
forbid myself from letting this go. I'm not going to let this go, like a little kid that's digging in their heels and
Yeah.
saying, there's no way I'm going to let this go. You must be crazy to tell me to let this go. We're going to let this kid have its tantrum if it needs to. Whatever it is, however long it takes, we're going to hold space for these feelings until it softens. And it softens. It does soften. If you hold space for it, it does soften, and it will ease, and it will let it go.
And one of the in that setting, one of the things that I often find useful as well is affirming the younger part for finding a tool that kept us safe in that past moment.
Yes.
Because that's what it was doing. And oftentimes, like when we're doing, regular inner child work, we're just the stuff that we're picking up, like the child is having to be adaptive to be safe. And
Yes.
they're not being taught how to be adaptive to be safe. They're
Mhm.
just figuring it out and being able to go,
Yes.
oh my gosh, look at you, little guy, what you were able to figure out and be able to do that sort of stuff as we move forward.
Yeah, they're little
And
superheroes.
yeah,
Little superheroes.
and makes it
Mhm.
possible to navigate that as we're navigating, we're working our way through that.
Yes.
So then, as we're engaging with this and we have a new approach,
Mhm.
I guess there's always two things that I think about when I am doing deep work like this.
Mhm.
Number one is the appropriateness of me to be doing this sort of work on my own. When
Mm,
I am,
good question.
because when I'm tapping on my own, I am tuning into an issue. I am cognitively deciding what the plan is, and I am having to hold the container to keep me safe and manage all of that so I can then get in and out of the intervention in a way that is safe. And there are things that there's appropriate for that, and there are things where I am
Yes.
too close to the issue to do that.
Absolutely.
So let's take that question first. Then I want to talk about timeline and that sort of stuff because, like, faster than traditional doesn't mean 1 minute miracle type stuff. So I want to talk about both
Yes.
of those things. So talk about that first one first, like this
Yes.
idea that just because I understand this, just because I can unpack this, how
Yes.
how do we do this safely?
Right. Great question. So, I mean, question to Eugene, do you still work with a practitioner
I do.
when it comes to absolutely. I do too.
Yeah.
100%. So, when it comes to this kind of deep work, I absolutely turn to the practitioners I trust. Because when I'm in the driver's seat, I'm going to have blind spots, and
Mhm.
I will need help navigating this. And a practitioner will always take you to where your subconscious is trying to protect you not to go, right? So yes, I would say to really do this deep work and these deep conversations, let's do it with a practitioner, to have, even for that safe container of compassion and awareness, that someone else is there to witness. That witness is also really important. I would say you do it with a practitioner, and it's just a safer
Yeah.
choice. It's just the safer option. The basic inquiries, as in kind of like how much of this is my own, or these kind of like little inquiries, that's something you can do on your own.
Mm-hmm.
That's something you can. And always, like, the simplest way to tap on yourself is, can you tune into your body and see where you feel this in your body, and just tap on what's coming up in your body.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the deeper work, that's when I would recommend doing it with a practitioner, even if you're skilled, even if you've done this work for many years.
Yeah, I guess kind of the framework that I have, like, so I have a priority stack that I work through. And my priority stack is safe, ethical, useful.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't pass the first, I don't get to the second. If I don't pass the second, I don't get to the third, as I'm working my way through this stuff. And if I'm asking the question about whether or not if this is safe, if I go, I wonder if this is safe, the answer is no. Like
Yes.
if it's not an obvious yes, then I'm going to operate it's a no, because I am going to err on the side of safety as I'm navigating this stuff.
I love that.
And and like, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And it is awesome that we have a tool set that we can access on our own in so many different ways. And we are here gathering for 24 hours working with the Peaceful Heart Network. We're giving folks tools that they can use out there, but they have specifically crafted their tools in such a way that that sense of safety is built into the processes they're doing. They're not just saying, you're not just handing the keys to the Ferrari to the 16-year-old. Like, there's guardrails inside of that to make sure that we're doing this in that way. And so, and the other thing I think is really important for all of us to hear is that it doesn't mean I'm a bad practitioner if I can't do like when it comes to taking care of myself, it's so vital that I am checking my ego at the door as I'm navigating my way through this particular piece of it.
100%.
And being okay with that. You asked me if I worked with a practitioner. When I have someone who's having a conversation with me and they're thinking about working with me, anytime a prospective client asks me that question, I'm like, awesome. You're thinking in terms of safety, and that's great, which means that if you're asking me if I'm working with a practitioner, I, on some level, can trust you as a client to know that you're going to be thoughtful and deliberate as we engage in this particular process.
Absolutely. Yes.
So then the second question, and I'm sure on some level, the answer, like all coaching question, is it depends. But I think it is useful for us to, I am thankful that we as a community spend significantly less time talking about 1 minute and 1 session miracles. Like,
I know it's changed so much, right? And I mean, just like, since I've been in this community for 20 years now, which is crazy.
And it makes sense.
There was like a lot of push. Yes, there was a lot of need to make this happen really rapidly.
I got to give you the stuff and the fact. So let's just, like, outcome is happiness divided by expectation. And so I think it is good and useful. Like, when you are, as a practitioner, having a client come to you and we've gone, great, we are dealing with a thing that is probably in this capacity, like in your mind, even if you're not saying out loud, like what are you thinking process wise? What is the length of time, the length of intervention that we're engaging with that?
Yes. So again, it's something where I say I can't give an answer before I
Right.
have worked with you, right? And
Yep.
or before we see what the depth is that
Mhm.
we are working with. The second thing I would say is really talk about how much time the subconscious actually needs and the body needs to integrate
Yep.
things that our brain may be faster than our body
Yep.
catching up, and that takes time. And then really slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah.
Is what I say. It's really the more, I know we want these big breakthroughs. We want these huge cognitive shifts.
Yeah.
We all crave them so much. But the little pieces, the little integrations that happen, these little shifts are far more powerful and more sustainable than some of these. Are there sometimes these big breakthroughs and we're not the same after we've had them? Yes, there are. And we love them, of course, but we are more likely with this kind of work going to have increments of breakthroughs, but they are gems that remain and that stay. In terms of research, when it comes to PTSD, we of course know like about 6 sessions is going to reduce PTSD tremendously. And so that's kind of like what I say, what research can tell us.
Right.
We are working also with the PTSD that may not have started with yourself. So I definitely would say, if you really want to do this work consistently, count to be in this for, I'd say, at least 10 sessions.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of like a rough first framework I'm giving to people. I have an ongoing group work where people actually sign up for a year or more, because that's kind of like a really deep and affordable way to do this work in an ongoing way, because a lot of my clients have understood that we need to do this work as you and I are doing. We need to do this work consistently, and repetition is key. Awesome. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, Mirjam, I really appreciate the conversation, because it is so hard when we're in a circumstance where there is something that is dogging us and we don't have an entry point, and it can feel so demoralizing and just so, because it is so far outside of our experience, that we don't have a hook or an entry point of any sort. We don't have a single other than what I'm feeling in the moment. And so just having a little knowledge and a little framework makes it so much easier for us to be able to think about this in thoughtful and deliberate ways. So
I know it is a topic that, goes around, but it also feels so untangible and hard to grasp. So yes, you're welcome. And it was wonderful to be in conversation with you.
Excellent. Very good. Hopefully I'll talk to you soon, my friend. Thanks a lot.
Yes. Thank you, Jane.
Bye. You bet. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. As you look at the screen right now, you can see a link to the entire playlist of every single conversation for previous 24 hours of tapping. There are over 120 presentations waiting for you. And please consider supporting the amazing work of the Peaceful Heart Network.